This is chapter 9 on core competencies and outsourcing. So there are 5 learning objectives. The first one, we're going to go through the term core competency. Next, we're going to define outsourcing and discuss reasons why companies outsource. Third, we're going to go through the 3 phases to developing and executing an outsourcing strategy. Fourth, we're going to look at potential risks associated with outsourcing. And finally, we're going to conduct a make or buy analysis to support an outsourcing decision. So for the first learning objective, what is core competency? Core competency is the set of activities, skills, or advantages that distinguishes a company from its competitors. So to compete and win in the global marketplace, a company must be uniquely good, at least at one thing that the customer values. So what does customers value? It can be in terms of quality, cost, flexibility, delivery, and innovation. So how do we identify our core competencies? So we address these questions. First, does the identified skill set contribute significantly to what customers perceive as our organization's value added? So what does the customer look at our company as having a sense of something that they value? So as we talked about just now, what do they value? They value things related to quality, cost, flexibility, delivery, and innovation. Okay, so the second question here, is the skill set difficult for others to replicate or imitate? Okay, that's the second question. The third question, are we particularly good at the skill set or willing to invest the resources to become excellent? The fourth question, is the skill set broad enough that it allows us to the opportunity to enter many diverse markets or businesses? In this slide, it explains about the term complementary core competencies. So in the first point here, it explains that once a company finds its core competency, for example, whether it is in terms of quality, cost, flexibility, delivery, or innovation, then it can design the supply chain to support its competitive strategy, value proposition, and competency development. So in this case, outsourcing non-critical activities to supply chain partners allows companies to leverage complementary core competencies. So even though the specific company is not doing the activity, they are outsourcing the non-critical activities to their supply chain partners. So overall, the company benefits because the activities that they are doing now generally benefits the whole of the supply chain. So this is the outsourcing flowchart. So we'll start off with this question here. Does it contribute significantly to the customer's perceived value added? So if you refer to your slide here, okay, so the questions, these 4 questions here are simplified and transferred to this flowchart. So you have here, does it contribute significantly to customers' perceived value added? If you answer yes, and if it's difficult to replicate, and you answer yes again, you do not outsource this activity because it's something that you are good at, and then it's what your customers perceive and know you for. Okay, so if it's really important to you, so you do not outsource that. Then we have the next question here. If it contributes significantly to customers' perceived value added, but it's not difficult to replicate, you can consider outsourcing, but you have to proceed with caution. Next, if you do not regard that it's something of significance through the customer's view, and then it does not directly support a critical value set, so you can consider outsourcing. If it does support a critical value added skill set, and then it's not difficult to replicate, then you can consider outsourcing. But if you answer yes here to does it directly support a critical value added skill set, and then you say difficult to replicate, you do not outsource. Okay. Things that you are good at, and those are the things that your customers view you and know you for, you do not outsource. Okay, so the next issue is on defining outsourcing, and we're going to discuss reasons why companies outsource. So outsourcing is the process of moving an aspect of either production, service, or business function from within an organization to an outside supplier. So I always say that you outsource things that you are not good at. So there are several types of outsourcing trends. We have the first one is contract manufacturing. So this is a form of outsourcing. It's just that focusing on manufacturing. So a third party makes an end product or major component under another company's brand. The second type of outsourcing trend is third party logistics, where we use a supplier to provide combination of logistics services such as transportation, warehousing, and inventory management. Offshoring is when you do outsourcing to a different country. For business process outsourcing, this is basically outsourcing support functions such as HR, payroll, logistics, and etc. So here are the reasons why companies outsource. So we look at the benefits of outsourcing. So the first point here, it says that by outsourcing non-strategic processes, an organization can focus its attention on those things it does best to satisfy their customers. Okay, so when they focus their attention on the things that they are good at, they are able to also save costs in terms of reducing operating costs and also conserve their capital. So I give the example of they do not have to maintain or buy assets such as lorries. They do not have to buy warehouses in order to keep their stocks. Okay, so these will be in terms of benefit for the company. The third point is they improve their performance because they are being more productive, focusing on what they're good at. The fourth and fifth point are related. So because they are taking the service of another company, they are having access to lower cost labor, they are having more resources, and also benefit from outside expertise. So here are the top reasons for outsourcing, and as you can see, the highest reason would be in terms of reducing operating costs. So we've looked at the benefits. Now let's look at the risk. Okay, so outsourcing is not without risk. So companies must know what kind of risk they take when they outsource their activities. So one of the things is that outsourcing strategic activities may cause a loss of competitive position. So we have two types of risks here. We have strategic risk and tactical risk. So when you talk about competitive position, you're talking about the strategic risk. Strategic risks are long-term, perhaps irreversible risks based on loss of knowledge related to core activities. So basically, when we talk about losing competitive position, it's because the entity that we outsource to learn our secrets, learn how to, for example, produce our products, and in the end becomes our competitors. Then we have tactical risks, which are short-term risks based on use of supplier for capacity, not for knowledge. So for tactical risks, it's all based on short-term risks. Okay, so whether they are able to provide us the product in the short term or not. Okay, so we'll talk about these two issues in the next slide. So increased dependence on suppliers for knowledge weakens the buyer's relative bargaining power. So in long term, if you become very dependent on your supplier, it will weaken your power in terms of bargaining with them, either on the price of outsourcing the service. Yeah. So we have here the differences between strategic risk and tactical risk. So let's look at tactical risk. So remember, short term. So the firm can experience short-term supply shortages. If you only limit yourselves to one or two outsourcing suppliers only, you might experience this shortages. And then there might be hidden transaction or management costs. So it means that they might charge you more than you intended to pay, and then you might have loss of schedule control because now they are supplying the products for you. For example, when you do contract manufacturing, they are the ones who is manufacturing for you. So when you promise your customer, your products will depend a lot on your supplier. And then there would be short-term price fluctuations. This is a kind of risk. If you do it in a contract, then it's more manageable. But if you didn't put it in a contract, you might face price fluctuations. Okay, so that's tactical risks, which are short-term. Then we have strategic risks, which are long-term. So we know that in future, we might face having them becoming our future competitors, because in long term they will gain a lot of knowledge or learn the tricks of the trade from us because they are producing for us, for example, and then in the future they are going to be a big threat for us, possibly, right? So this is a kind of a risk that the company must know. Next, we move on to learning objective 3 on the 3 phases to developing and executing an outsourcing strategy. So in this slide, it summarizes your outsourcing processes into 3 phases. We have the first phase, establishing the mission, generating and screening ideas. Second phase is to conduct an outsourcing analysis, and the third phase is to establish and manage the outsourcing relationship. So who are the key participants for each phase? The first phase, we must include the top management, business unit, and functional leaders. So they are the ones going to establish the mission for the outsourcing activity, and they will generate the types of processes and activities that are suitable for outsourcing. The second phase is where multidisciplinary team of key stakeholders in the current process going to do the feasibility study to see whether a certain process or a certain activity is suitable for outsourcing. The third phase is where the purchasing or relationship managers are the ones going to establish the relationship and also manage the relationship with outsourcing suppliers. So for the first phase, the high-level managers, they need to state the benefits that they want to gain out of this outsourcing activity, and then they need to nominate which process or which activity they want to outsource, and also screen those processes against the company's core competencies to determine which activities or which processes are suited for outsourcing. Because not all processes or not all activities in the company are suitable for outsourcing. Because you have to remember, if that activity is something that you are good at and it's something that is difficult to replicate, okay, then you do not outsource that. Okay, you outsource something that you are not good at and easy to replicate. The second part is when you do the outsourcing analysis. So you evaluate each potential process, whether it's suitable for outsourcing or not. Okay, so evaluation includes developing a better understanding of the organization's needs, gathering detailed cost, performance, and risk information, and also do a total cost of ownership analysis, whether it's more beneficial for you to do it yourself or an outsourcing supplier doing it for you. So when you identify potential outsourcing suppliers, okay, so what are you considering? So are supply sources available? Do potential supply sources meet the capacity, quality, and your other needs? Are the suppliers interested, and what risks are present in outsourcing? In this case, we need to restate the need and expected benefits, and then identify and mitigate potential risks, and also finally do the whole total cost of ownership analysis, which is part of your learning objective 5. Alright, so the third phase is where you establish and manage suppliers. So you need to identify the types of supplier relationships and how you want to manage them. So management of outsourcing relationships can be 3 types. We have routine, cooperative, and committed. So in learning objective 4, we're going to go through more detail in terms of what are the potential risks associated with outsourcing. So most organizations are good at recognizing tactical risk. So a larger issue is strategic risk, because through outsourcing, a supplier might be able to capture a larger share of the overall chain's margin, which makes them more powerful in the supply chain. So we are worried that in future they might be our future competitors. So contingency plans should be developed to deal with identified risks associated with outsourcing. So here are examples of how you can mitigate each risk. So when you are facing capacity or shortages for your products, you should identify alternative sources. Okay, so I mentioned just now, if you are only depending on 1 or 2 outsourcing suppliers, maybe you need to identify more alternative sources. Second risk here, loss of competitive pricing information. So you then have the right to test the market and go out to receive competitive bids for comparable services, because now you're not only depending on the one outsourcing supplier that you're using. Okay. The third risk is hidden transaction or management fees. So if you do not want to be overcharged, okay, you should cap the fees in the contract, so you are in a safe position. Next, we have poor service to internal customers. So you should establish internal user survey so that you get feedback and then you can do improvements. The next risk here is poor communication or management of service provider. So that's why you need your relationship managers to be assigned to these outsourcing suppliers for them to manage the services. Third risk here, we have difficulty in controlling costs. So maybe you should hire a third party to audit the service provider. And the last risk here, you have short contract duration. High turnover would be expensive for supplier and frustrating for internal users. So to avoid this, you can have contract accession clauses where if you're happy with them, you can immediately continue the contract and they can service you for a while longer. The last learning objective is on conducting a make or buy analysis to support your outsourcing decision. So part of this, we're going to go through the total cost of ownership, or TCO. So under outsourcing analysis for TCO, a cross-functional team should analyze all direct and hidden costs. So the cost includes materials, labor, energy, overhead, transportation, inventory, quality, obsolescence, and capital. So you should also form up a sensitivity analysis to determine the total cost of ownership basis, where we look into the best, worst, and expected scenarios. This slide explains about how you want to manage outsourcing relationship, because each supplier might be different. We might have different relationships with certain suppliers. Some are more important, some are less important. So we have a continuum here. We have from minimal service to full service turnkey operations. So minimal service are the ones that have limited scope. Okay, so they are less unique and therefore easy to replace. So you can think this as maybe services that provides printing services, for example, or printing your banners or marketing materials. Okay, then you have full service suppliers providing unique value and are therefore most likely to be closely integrated. So at this figure down here, you have for limited scope supplier, we regard them either arm's length or niche provider. And then for full service supplier, we have hybrid, and the most integrated one is the solutions integrator. So we'll look at each relationship one by one. The first one is the least integrated one, which is arm's length. So best suited for routine purchases of goods or services such as print shop. So no long-term commitment or special value added by this supplier. Non-recurring purchases of items that aren't critical, and because the supply market for these kind of services are very competitive, the switching costs are low and suppliers are not differentiated. The next complex one is niche. So providers are generally specialized, providing a very specific or limited good or service. So may be more difficult to replace than arm's length suppliers because they are specialized in nature. And in general, these are suppliers specialized non-recurring purchases. So the more integrated one is hybrid. So they provide an intermediate level of service and provide items of moderate importance that are somewhat integrated into the organization's operations, such as your logistics services. So they may be responsible for a whole subsystem or process rather than one clearly defined piece, or they do limited scope providers. So standard turnkey solutions, and may even run some of the company's internal processes with their own people. So in this case, ongoing communication is critical, and there is higher degree of reliance to the outsourcing supplier and also higher switching costs. The highest integrated one is the full service, where they provide strategic items and processes that are established in the firm's own processes. We have custom solutions and often engage in business process outsourcing of critical functions. So these providers have a very high level of responsibility and accountability. They have high significance in terms of presence in the organization, and they're working side by side with the organization's employees. Difficult to manage this kind of relationship because it's very complex. So in this slide, these questions allows you to identify whether an outsourcing supplier needs to be arm's length, niche provider, hybrid, or solutions integrator. So the higher the score, they are more integrated into the company's operations. So this slide explains about the types of relationships that you can have with your outsourcing suppliers. So first we have routine, where these types of relationships are named for traditional contract management, and the contract terms are clear and the deliverables are simple to use and measure, and you have these kinds of relationship better suited for arm's length and niche arrangements. For cooperative relationships, it's suited for hybrid outsourcing arrangements. So the contract defines the relationship, but the suppliers also cooperate on an ongoing basis to redefine expectations and goals based on changing business needs. So a little bit more complex compared to the routine relationship. And the most complicated one is the committed relationships, common between buyers and solution integrators. So the two parties have committed a great deal of resources and efforts to the relationship, and their management style should reflect this. So to identify the types of relationship, you can identify through these questions. So as you can see, if the levels are low, most likely it's routine, and if it's in the middle, it's more as cooperative, and if it's highly integrated, it's more of a committed relationship. So once you establish the relationship, how do you manage it? So you have ongoing and post-audit evaluations. So for routine relationships, it can be as simple as feedback through complaining to the supplier that is performing poorly. So if a significant supplier may receive a standard report card of key performance indicators, so the report compares actual to expected performance of key KPIs. So this is a simple feedback way. You have a standard report card. For cooperative relationships, the supplier is likely to do a semi-customized report card. So they capture data regarding the value the supplier adds. So a more formal and adaptable report card compared to routine. And the third type is a customized report card, because this is the outsourcing supplier that is most important to you. Okay, so you really need to be flexible and really need to establish what are the performance indicators, okay, important to both parties. Much of the performance feedback would be verbal, because they will have close day-to-day interaction as both parties are working together closely. Okay, so here in this slide, it shows the typical outsourcing report card. So on the left side, we have all your performance indicators, and then we have our ratings, so where they are currently, and then what are the goals. So, and then you have the comment section. If they're doing well, you'll say excellent, keep up the good work. And if there are parts where they need to improve, so you mention in the comment that there needs to be improvement in the area. So lastly, we talked a lot about outsourcing. So there's a term called insourcing. So basically here, the outsourcing decision is not permanent or irreversible. So it can be reversed. So you can decide one day you want to outsource, then after a while you decide, I don't think this is working, then you want to do it yourself, so you insource. So companies may bring outsourced activities back in-house due to a number of reasons. First, failure to achieve expected benefits. Second, you want to increase control over the key processes. And third, you change your business priorities and core competence as your business evolves. Okay, so that's all for this chapter.